On July 10th, we unveil the all-new JG9 Studios, the coolest NFL office on YouTube where all future streams will take place. Video drops at 6 p.m. Eastern, and a celebratory live stream drops at 9 p.m. Eastern. And now, on with our feature presentation. The Freezer Bowl, one of the most iconic games in the history of the NFL. Not necessarily for what transpired on the field, or for any individual plays, outside of a laughably bad field goal attempt by San Diego Chargers kicker Rolf Benirschke, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, but for what the players and fans were dealing with. Because there's cold playoff games, and then there's whatever the heck this game was over at Riverfront Stadium. To the point where if this happened today, I genuinely don't think the game will be played due to health concerns involved, especially since players and fans that were in the stadium that day still report lingering effects more than 40 years later. Because on this day, January 10th, 1982, in front of their home fans, the Cincinnati Bengals advanced to their first ever Super Bowl, winning over the San Diego Chargers 27-7. That was the good news. The bad news? Well, the game was taking place in negative 9-degree weather and 24-mile-per-hour winds. Combine those two factors, and you get a wind chill factor of minus 32 under today's formula. And under the outdated formula that was used in 1982, a wind chill of minus 59. For some perspective on how cold that is, because that just sounds cold. If you sit outside for 5 minutes in 0-degree wind chill, you will get frostbite. If you sit outside for 1 minute in minus 20-degree wind chill, you will get frostbite. Play a football game for 3 hours, plus the other time on the field for warm-ups and whatnot, or watch a football game in those conditions for that long, and do it in minus 32-degree wind chill, and I'm going to take a wild guess and say that this is not good for the body. We, as humans, were not meant to survive and or thrive in this weather. Now the good news is that the next time these teams met, in a highly anticipated rematch on Monday Night Football, even though the game was on a December night, it was in San Diego, so the weather would not be an issue. No one was going to be freezing to death at this game, and none of the players were going to develop hypothermia as a result of playing in this one. However, what you might not know about this game is that this game was also riddled in controversy for the playing conditions, and that it was unsafe for the players to be playing in this one, according to some people, including the Chargers' own head coach, the Hall of Famer Don Coryell. Because if the 1981 AFC Championship between the Bengals and the Chargers was the Freezer Bowl, the rematch in 1982 should be known more than 40 years later as the Rodeo Bowl. Yes, you heard that right, the Rodeo Bowl. And yes, it's as stupid as it sounds. Because this is the story behind what has to be, considering the circumstances, one of the strangest controversies in the history of Monday Night Football. Before I talk about the actual controversy in question and what led to it, we need some context to understand the importance of this game, outside of the rematch aspect of it. And before I go any further, I should note that this is not the first time that I've talked about a field-related controversy on Monday Night Football. In fact, I did another video a few years ago about a game from 1970 between two AFC teams, the Baltimore Colts and the Kansas City Chiefs, in what happened to be the second ever game in Monday Night Football history. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, to make a long story short there, the Colts, due to a contractual agreement with the Baltimore Orioles, the Major League Baseball team that they shared the stadium with, had to move their field and reposition it 30 yards up from its usual spot so as not to damage the field. So this was not the first field-related controversy in Monday Night Football history. Far from it. However, that one was more of a logistical nightmare where the field was completely safe to play on. The only question was, where was the field going to be? This one? The one in our story today from 1982? Yeah, not so much. Anyways, regarding this game, it's Monday, December 20th, 1982, and we've got a huge game on our hands over at Jack Murphy Stadium in San Diego between the Cincinnati Bengals and the San Diego Chargers. This might have been the most anticipated game on paper for the entire 1982 season for a few reasons. Number one, obviously, you had the rematch element, as anytime you've got two teams competing in a rematch of a conference championship, especially one as iconic and as controversial as the Freezer Bowl, you're going to have super high stakes. Number two, the game was nationally televised on ABC on Monday Night Football, which always raises the stakes being shown in front of the whole country like that, especially for a team like the Bengals, who for them, this was their only appearance on national television all season, despite being the reigning AFC champions. And number three, this game was monumental for the standings of the strike-shortened 9-game season. Entering this one, the Cincinnati Bengals were 5-1, half a game back of the Los Angeles Raiders for the number one seed in the AFC, and home field advantage throughout the playoffs in the Super Bowl tournament. Win this game, and with 2 games to go, you've got a shot at making the playoffs just like last year, run directly through Riverfront Stadium. As for the Chargers, they were 4-2. A win here, and they clinch a playoff spot, seeing as 5 wins is enough to get them in. Plus, they would only be 1 game back of the Raiders for the number 1 seed, and they would be in a 4-way tie with the Bengals, Dolphins, and Jets for a home playoff game in round 1, and potentially in round 2. Lose this one and drop to 4-3, and it's going to be awfully tough to put yourself in a position to host a playoff game. Plus, your playoff hopes sort of hang on by a thread, seeing as there were quite a few teams with 3 wins right on the outside looking in. So the stakes were absolutely huge in this one, and that goes without saying. And in a game like this, and in a game like the one you've been watching this whole time, you want a game of such importance and such magnitude to be decided on the field by the players. You want the quality of the on-field product to decide it, and don't want outside elements and unsafe, somewhat dangerous elements to be the factor in this one. It's like what would transpire in the 1982 AFC Championship later in the postseason between the New York Jets and the Miami Dolphins. You don't want the field acting as a key player in the game. However, that's where you'd be wrong for this one. That's where you would be very, very wrong. Because as it turns out, the Chargers were not the only tenants of Jack Murphy Stadium in the month of December. And no, I'm not talking about the annual Holiday Bowl for college football. That was a complete non-issue, as that was just part of the territory. Rather, I'm talking about an unusual event that, when you think about it, makes no sense as to why it would happen here, of all places, during football season. Because 1 week before the Chargers took on the Bengals at Jack Murphy Stadium, this event at Jack Murphy Stadium happened.
It's the national finals, the Super Bowl of pro rodeo. You'll see North America's top pro rodeo cowboys competing for world champion titles on a special telecast. Don't miss it. The best rodeo action of the year, the National Finals Rodeo, right here.
Sunday at 9 here on 3.
That's right, the rodeo. The freaking rodeo. Because for some reason, on December 11th and December 12th, right at Jack Murphy Stadium, the grass field was completely destroyed so that the International Rodeo Association could hold its national championships there. This was the first time ever that the championships were held at Jack Murphy Stadium. And when you break it down, especially considering the timing, holding the rodeo there made about as much sense as holding events for the 1956 Summer Olympics in Sweden 6 months before the Olympics commenced, even though the Olympics took place in Australia, and felt about as weird as holding events for the 2024 Summer Olympics in Tahiti, despite the fact that the actual Olympics are taking place in France halfway around the world. Jack Murphy Stadium? During this time of year? Why the heck would the International Rodeo Association do that? And why would the stadium possibly accept hosting such an event that, to the shock of no one with the brain, would damage the field for this Chargers-Bengals game right here? And I hate that I have to do this, but I genuinely don't know. I don't know the reason. I dug high and low to try and figure out why this happened, especially since the seating configuration had to be changed specifically for the rodeo. So this was going to cost a lot of money. And I couldn't come up with anything. Seriously, if anyone knows the answer to this, please let me know in the comments. I can't even conspire that the strike had anything to do with it, and that they figured that the players and owners would not come to an agreement, thereby canceling the 1982 season and making the stadium available. That would make sense if it wasn't for the fact that college football wasn't impacted by the strike, and the Holiday Bowl was going to be played there afterwards anyways. This was one of those decisions that just didn't make a whole lot of logical sense on paper as to why you would hold a rodeo at a football stadium during football season, since that destroys the field. It makes about as much sense as setting up a corn maze during Christmas. But hey, maybe the field won't be so bad. Maybe the stadium crew can do a good job at making it seem like the rodeo never happened, and the field will be in pristine condition, and the stadium won't smell like manure, and everything will be good to go. Except, that did not happen. In fact, the exact opposite happened, which should not be a surprise. When you have livestock, and you've got bulls and horses rolling around on a dirt field, and then, in a matter of days, you had to get rid of it and make it a good playing surface for multiple football games, yeah, good luck with that. It's not possible. And to say that head coach Don Coryell was furious about this would be an understatement, as Coryell was fuming that this was the field that his team was going to have to play on, and that the city stadium authority had no idea what the heck they were doing or what the heck they were thinking with this. Said Coryell, "Here we have the Holiday Bowl here, a national TV game Friday night, and our game Monday night. And a few days before, they put all this mud on one end of the field and let cows and horses and whatever run all over it. It's the worst grass field I've ever seen. The animal manure scattered on the field is dangerous to the player's health. There are dangers from abrasions. A player can get tetanus. As it is, there's more dirt than grass down there." And yeah, Coryell's got a pretty good point. It's already not fun getting tackled when you're landing on grass. Now, you're landing on a layer of dirt and landing on animal manure. And it's an uneven surface because of the scattered manure? You're running routes and you're stepping in animal poop? You can definitely see the frustration. Plus, the stadium just stunk. Coryell said that it smelled like a barnyard, and that someone had no pride in the facility, because if they did have pride, there's no way that they would have allowed something like this to happen. It's already tough enough playing football, and now you've got to play football while you can't smell anything good. Now, stadium manager John Hoagland adamantly refuted these comments by Coryell, and said that the field wasn't as bad as Coryell was making it out to be. He said that the field was protected by 18 inches of straw, as well as 18 inches of dirt, and that there was no manure on the field, but rather, the odor came from rotting, wet straw. I also love how Hoagland said that the rodeo wouldn't be held there again, as the promoter lost money, which isn't too surprising. But with those comments by Hoagland, I love them because it doesn't change the problem at hand. This stadium smells not because of this, but because of this. It's not the manure, it's the straw. I don't really care how it smells so bad and the science behind it. Bottom line, it just smells bad. It's almost like if you're applying for a job and you don't get it, and you think it's because of the way you answered one interview question. But then, the employer calls you and says, actually, it was because of the way you answered this question. Like that doesn't change the fact that you still didn't get the job. Nothing about the situation changes. Whether it's because of one thing or another, you didn't get the job. And the same thing applies here. Whether the awful smell is because of wet and rotting straw, or because of literal manure, the field still reeks and is not fun to be on. On top of that, I love how Hoagland said the rodeo wouldn't be held there again, as if, once again, that changes the issue at hand. The rodeo was held there in 1982. Nothing that happens in 1983, or 1984, or 1985, or any other year changes the fact that right now, on this all-important day in December of 1982, the field absolutely stinks. It's like if a driver hits me with his car and leaves me seriously injured. And the response is, it's unlikely that he's going to keep his license. Like, that doesn't change the fact that I'm seriously injured. It changes nothing about my current situation. So just to recap, we were having a Monday Night Football game, and maybe the biggest game of the entire 1982 regular season, taking place on a field full of manure, according to one source, and on dirt and rotting straw, according to another source, leaving Jack Murphy Stadium to completely reek. Whereas the last meeting between the teams in the Freezer Bowl left people covering their nose to avoid frostbite and to avoid getting sick, this meeting left people covering their nose to avoid smelling the remains of a rodeo that was held there just a few days ago for some inexplicable reason that I still have no idea why. This isn't even the first field-related controversy I've done a video on from December of 1982, as I talked about the battle between the Green Bay Packers and the Buffalo Bills that took place at Milwaukee County Stadium on a literal mud pit, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, at least that game, for as bad as it was, had a legitimate excuse, seeing as they didn't want to waste money on the field not knowing if the strike was going to end, seeing as the weather in Milwaukee made it impossible to make the field better, and seeing as the Brewers made it to the World Series, delaying matters even worse and delaying the baseball to football conversion. This, on the other hand, this was just a case of awful planning and logistics as to why anyone would schedule a freaking rodeo days before multiple football games. As for how this game turned out, well, there's a reason that you probably have never heard of this controversy before, and that's because the quality of the game itself made it irrelevant and made it a complete non-talking point afterwards. No one was talking about the manure. Everyone was talking about the quality of the game. Because this game truly was amazing, especially if you were a San Diego Chargers fan, as in one of the highest scoring games in the history of Monday Night Football. The Chargers got their revenge on the Bengals from last year's AFC Championship and won it by a final score of 50-34. San Diego finished the game with a whopping 661 yards of total offense, and combined between the two teams, they had 1,102 yards of total offense, as there were plenty of fireworks to go around, especially for the Chargers. You know it's a good one? When both starting quarterbacks in Ken Anderson and Dan Fouts, maybe the two best quarterbacks in football at the time, combined to throw for over 400 yards apiece. And when three separate players crossed the 100-yard receiving barrier, including Wes Chandler on the San Diego Chargers, who had maybe the greatest game by any receiver in Monday Night Football history by recording 10 catches for 260 yards and 2 touchdowns. This was a game that absolutely lived up to the hype, and then some, as in a highly frustrating and disappointing 1982 season for the fans for obvious reasons. This was a game that at least made them fall in love with professional football all over again. However, the circumstances under which this game was played were absolutely insane, seeing as this game was being played in a stadium full of dirt, manure, and wet and rotting straw. So for any stadium managers or facility managers watching this video for whatever reason, here's a word of advice. Don't schedule a freaking rodeo during football season. If you want to have a rodeo at your stadium, like Houston, do it in the off-season, where there will be ample time to clear the field of its stench and its animal remains. Don't do it just days before a game, especially multiple games when you factor in the Holiday Bowl. I promise you, it will not work out, and it will just serve to make everyone mad. Because in 1982, prior to this Monday Night Football game, Don Coryell was not in a yeehaw kind of mood. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.